People have almost always blamed the media for society's problems. This goes as far back to Socrates, who claimed that reading implants forgetfulness in men's souls. So you can only imagine the scrutiny film has faced over the years. The legacy of censorship in film is the very stuff film history is made of. From the Hays Code to the McCarthy-era witch hunts, censorship in film, spurred by moral panic, has been formative to the film industry since the very beginning. Moral outrage and the movies seem to go hand in hand, as far back as the 1890s, when the first movies arrived in America. An early example of a film that sparked outrage being Thomas Edison's The Kiss from 1896. The first film censorship laws in America, however, were local and state laws, many citing Chicago placing the first law in 1907, which, quote, were prohibiting the exhibition of obscene and immoral moving pictures, commonly shown in kinetoscopes, cinematographs, and penny arcades. For years, moral groups were outraged, but it wasn't until 1914 that the Women's Christian Temperance Union officially claimed that films were addictive and glorified war, causing crime. This sort of outrage eventually built up into 1922, when the Motion Picture Producers and Distributors of America were formed by William H. Hays. And eventually, in 1930, they created the Hays Code, known as the Production Code. However, the Hays Code wasn't actually enforced until 1934. Pre-Hays Code films were able to get away with a heightened amount of sexuality and violence, which latter Hays Code films didn't. This brings me to the 1933 film King Kong. Everybody knows King Kong, but for those unfamiliar, the story follows a filmmaker who wants to make a film in an uncharted island, only for the subject of this film, a giant ape, to fall in love with the main actress, and chaos ensues. It's a classic Beauty and Beast story that's been told hundreds of times. And as King Kong came out, just a year before the Hays Code was officially enforced, it gets away with a lot, including pretty shocking violence and sexual themes for the time. The film was later re-released in 1938 with multiple scenes removed, specifically the scene where Ann Darrow is undressed by Kong, and several scenes of Kong's rampage in the jungle and in New York. These scenes were removed entirely as they violated the code's rules concerning violence and sexual content. Yet, to modern audiences, this seems trivial, even silly. If Kong were re-released today, it would receive a PG or even G rating. But the Hays Code was strict, and practically controlled Hollywood, forcing the industry to compromise story for the sake of appeasing the censors and concerned parents. However, despite the restrictions of the Hays Code, plenty of filmmakers were able to get around those restrictions. One such film is the 1937 film The Awful Truth, directed by Leo McCarey and starring Cary Grant and Irene Dunne, who play the Warners, a married couple on the brink of divorce, who try to find love in other people, only to find out that they loved one another all along. It's surprising that the film was made under Hays Code restrictions, as the film's plot revolves around themes of sex and infidelity, as implied that both Jerry and Lucy are unfaithful to each other at different points. The film gets away with it, however, through subtle innuendo and quick-witted humor, so it's easy to believe that the censors just either didn't understand some of the jokes or didn't even notice them to begin with.
Now, my position must be considered. I have never yet been in a scandal.
Never been caught, huh?
No. I am a great teacher, not a great lover.
That's right, Omar. No one could ever accuse you of being a great lover.
Huh?
That is, I mean to say, well, who's to say whether you are or not? It's all so silly. But maybe you had better go.
The film was classified as a screwball comedy, a comedy subgenre made popular during the Great Depression, where the humor is often based on and revolves around misunderstanding. It's easy to see how the 30s screwball comedy later evolved into the sex comedies that were so popular in the 50s and beyond. The critic Andrew Sarris went on to say that screwball comedies were like sex comedies without the sex. You could even say that The Awful Truth borders on breaking Hays Code restrictions, as in one particular scene, Jerry's date Dixie performs a suggestive dance at a nightclub, in which her skirt is continually blown up, perhaps a precursor to the classic Marilyn Monroe scene in 1954's film, The 7-Year Itch. When one considers just how strict Hays Code restrictions were, it's shocking how much the film gets away with and tricks the censors. For example, under the Hays Code, a man and woman, even if married, couldn't be seen lying in the same bed. So, the ending of The Awful Truth circumvents this through the clever symbolism of the cuckoo clock gag, through which it's implied that Jerry and Lucy reunite in bed, perhaps another precursor to a famous scene, that being the ending of Hitchcock's North by Northwest, in which sex is implied by a train going into a tunnel. Also, funnily enough, Cary Grant is the lead for both films. and acted in many of the era's most famous screwball comedies. But following World War II, we got perhaps the most infamous era of Hollywood censorship, the McCarthy era, in which the United States was swept over by moral panic and mass hysteria that communists were all about. As the Red Scare impacted the entire nation, it makes sense that Hollywood was also a huge target of the communist witch hunts. The House of Un-American Activities launched massive investigations on Hollywood actors, writers, and directors, in fear that due to past political affiliations and left leanings, that there were Soviet spies in Hollywood. The business was turned in on itself, as people in Hollywood were encouraged to inform on each other or face the blacklist, in which they wouldn't be able to work in Hollywood anymore. The most famous being the B-picture actor Ronald Reagan, who testified against his fellow actors, providing names to the FBI of Screen Actor Guild's members who he suspected were communists. Most famous of all those to face the blacklist, however, were the Hollywood 10, a group of Hollywood directors, writers, and producers who refused to capitulate to the censorship and First Amendment violations imposed on them by the House of Un-American Activities, and so they faced the blacklist. And even though the 10 are seen as heroes to many now, at the time they were widely reviled by the American public, as they were seen as red agitators and communist sympathizers, which eventually led to the Waldorf Statement, through which pretty much every studio in Hollywood fired the Hollywood 10 to appease the public and the government. And just as early censorship in Hollywood was proposed by the Women's Christian Temperance Union, much of the Red Scare and censorship was pushed for by the American citizens, one group being the American Legion, which published monthly pamphlets exposing supposed communists in film and television. However, many blacklisted workers found new ways to make films. Take Dalton Trumbo, for instance, who began writing under pseudonyms, while there were others who simply founded their own production companies. The 1954 film Salt of the Earth was made independently of the Hollywood studio system by a group of the three blacklisted alleged communists: Paul Jericho, the film's producer, Michael Wilson, the film's writer, and Hubert J. Bieberman, the film's director. The film follows the story of a small, downtrodden community of Hispanic miners who live in horrible conditions imposed on them by the Delaware Zinc Company in New Mexico. The workers eventually unionize for better labor conditions and better sanitation, to which the company is eventually forced to capitulate to. The film is based on the true story of when miners for the Empire Zinc Corporation went on strike in Bayard, New Mexico in 1950. The writer of the film, Michael Wilson, was struck with inspiration, so he began to write Salt of the Earth in the very town in which it was based, and in cooperation with the people of the story who actually occurred to. And despite being made outside of the Hollywood system, many reported the film to the federal government, even as it was still in production, in fear that it was a Russian plot to make Americans and American companies look bad, as white Americans are painted as the oppressors in the film, which they were in real life too. Hence, government agencies were instructed to investigate carefully. And ironically, the biggest force that stood against the film was the Guild IATSE, which is a union in itself. However, despite the scrutiny the film faced, it was backed by labor leaders, religious figures, and minority groups, some even from the left wing. The film was praised for its realism, but nonetheless faced intense scrutiny, both from Hollywood and from the FBI. Theaters were warned that no loyal American theater would show it, and Chicago police even claimed that the film would incite people to riot, so it showed in relatively few cinemas. Nonetheless, it stands as an important piece untouched by the censors, making it unlike the previous films. Its message is a universal one of equality, freedom, and justice for all. And how can one even have true freedom of speech in a landscape where one can even speak their own mind without suppression, where one can even profess their beliefs without government interference? If that's not what America's First Amendment right to free speech is for, then what is? Salt of the Earth's message is just as relevant today as it was in 1954, as even in the absence of communists, people will always find another scapegoat to blame for society's issues. Censorship has always been a constant in media and film from the dawn of the medium, with the Women's Christian Temperance Union to the Hays Code and to the McCarthy-era witch hunts. Censorship has always been a constant in film and entertainment, and has gone to be one of the most influential pieces of film history.